The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of northern Afghanistan as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The SEAL team had been moving through the mountainous region for 6 hours, their boots crunching softly on the loose gravel that seemed to echo despite their careful steps. Morrison's team consisted of 8 highly trained operators, each man carrying nearly 80 pounds of gear across their backs. The mission briefing had been clear but dangerous. Locate and extract a high-value intelligence asset who had gone dark 3 days ago. The asset, known only by the codename Prophet, possessed critical information about a planned terrorist attack on American soil. Petty Officer First Class Danny Rodriguez moved up beside Morrison, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. Rodriguez had been with the team for 4 years and had earned Morrison's complete trust through countless operations. His specialty was communications, and right now, that skill was proving invaluable as they navigated the communication dead zones common in these remote mountains. "Sir, we're approaching the coordinates," Rodriguez whispered into his throat mic. "GPS shows 2 clicks northeast to the safe house." Morrison nodded and signaled for the team to take a brief tactical pause. They had been operating under strict radio silence since crossing into hostile territory 12 hours earlier. The Taliban presence in this region had increased significantly over the past month, and intelligence reports suggested that several foreign fighters had joined their ranks. The safe house they were approaching had been used by CIA operatives for the past 2 years. It was strategically positioned on a ridge that provided excellent visibility of the surrounding valleys, while remaining hidden from casual observation. Prophet had been using it as his base of operations while gathering intelligence on terrorist cells operating along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. As the team prepared to move again, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His 15 years of military experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that they were walking into trouble. The mountains were too quiet, even for this remote region. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, the team's senior enlisted man, appeared at Morrison's side. Thompson was a massive man, standing 6 feet 4 inches and weighing 240 pounds of solid muscle. His presence alone was often enough to intimidate enemies, but his real value lay in his tactical expertise and his ability to remain calm under the most intense pressure. "Something feels off, Skipper," Thompson said quietly. "Haven't seen so much as a bird in the last hour." Morrison shared Thompson's concern. In his experience, when nature went silent in hostile territory, it usually meant that human predators were nearby. He made the decision to alter their approach route, choosing a more circuitous path that would take them around a series of rocky outcroppings rather than directly up the main ridge. The team moved in a tactical column formation, with each man maintaining a 20-meter interval. Petty Officer Second Class Tony Chen, their demolitions expert, took point. Chen was small and wiry, but his expertise with explosives had saved the team's lives on more than one occasion. Behind him, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Miguel Santos carried the team's medical supplies along with his M4 carbine. As they crested a small hill, Chen suddenly raised his fist, signaling the team to halt immediately. Morrison moved forward to Chen's position, his heart rate increasing as he prepared for whatever threat had been detected. Through his binoculars, Chen was observing something in the valley below that had caught his attention. "What do you see?" Morrison whispered. Chen handed him the binoculars and pointed toward a cluster of buildings about 800 meters away. "Movement in the tree line, sir. At least 3 individuals. Possibly more. They're not wearing uniforms, but they're carrying weapons." Morrison studied the area through the binoculars. The buildings Chen had spotted were not the safe house they were seeking, but rather what appeared to be an abandoned farming compound. However, the movement in the surrounding trees was definitely human, and definitely armed. The individuals were positioning themselves in what looked like an ambush formation. Rodriguez moved up to Morrison's position and began setting up his communications equipment. Despite the radio silence protocol, Morrison knew they needed to report this potential threat to their operations center. However, as Rodriguez attempted to establish contact, he encountered nothing but static on all frequencies. "Sir, we're completely cut off," Rodriguez reported. "Someone's jamming our communications." The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. Communication jamming in this remote region could only mean one thing. They had walked into a carefully planned trap. Somewhere in the mountains around them, enemy forces were using sophisticated equipment to isolate the SEAL team from any outside support. Thompson crawled up to Morrison's position, his expression grim. "Skipper, we've got movement on 3 sides. Chen's spotted at least a dozen fighters positioning themselves around our location." Morrison quickly assessed their tactical situation. They were caught on exposed ground with limited cover, facing an unknown number of enemy fighters who had clearly been expecting them. The safe house mission would have to wait. Right now, survival was the only priority. "We need to find defensible terrain," Morrison decided. "There's a rocky outcropping about 200 meters to our east. We can use it for cover while we figure out our next move." The team began moving toward the rocky position, but they had barely covered 50 meters when the first shots rang out. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds split the morning air, followed immediately by the whine of bullets passing overhead. Morrison hit the ground hard, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with being under fire. "Contact front," Chen shouted into his radio, forgetting for a moment that their communications were jammed. The gunfire was coming from multiple directions, confirming Thompson's assessment that they were surrounded. Morrison could hear the different sounds of various weapons: the rapid chatter of automatic rifles, the deeper boom of a heavy machine gun, and the distinctive whistle of rocket-propelled grenades being fired in their direction. Santos, the team medic, had found cover behind a large boulder and was returning fire with his M4. His training as a hospital corpsman meant he was skilled in both saving lives and taking them when necessary. Next to him, Petty Officer 3rd Class Kevin Brooks, their intelligence specialist, was trying to identify enemy positions through his rifle scope. The intensity of the gunfire told Morrison that they were facing a much larger force than initially estimated. This wasn't a random encounter with a Taliban patrol. This was a coordinated ambush, involving at least 30 or 40 fighters. Someone had known they were coming, and someone had prepared a very warm welcome. Rodriguez was frantically working on his radio equipment, trying different frequencies and power settings in an attempt to break through the jamming. Their survival might depend on his ability to call for air support or extraction. But so far, his efforts were proving futile. "Rodriguez, forget the radio for now," Morrison shouted over the gunfire. "Grab your rifle and help us suppress these guys." The SEAL team's superior training and equipment were keeping them alive, but they were vastly outnumbered and in an extremely disadvantageous position. Morrison knew that their only hope lay in reaching the rocky outcropping where they could establish a proper defensive perimeter. As bullets continued to snap overhead, Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of their mission. Instead of trying to retreat, he would lead his team in a fighting advance toward the rocks, using superior firepower and tactical movement to break through the enemy encirclement. The morning sun climbed higher in the Afghan sky, as 8 American warriors prepared to fight for their lives against overwhelming odds, not knowing that their desperate situation was about to become even more complicated. Morrison's tactical advance toward the rocky outcropping began with a series of coordinated movements that showcased years of training and combat experience. Thompson and Chen provided covering fire while Santos and Brooks moved in short rushes across the open ground. Each movement was precise and calculated, designed to minimize exposure while maintaining offensive pressure on the enemy positions. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves well, using the natural terrain to their advantage. Morrison could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different locations, indicating a level of tactical sophistication that surprised him. These weren't the typical insurgent fighters they usually encountered. Someone with military training was clearly directing their movements. As the team advanced, Petty Officer 2nd Class Ryan Palmer, their sniper, found a position behind a large rock that gave him a clear view of several enemy positions. Palmer was known throughout the SEAL community for his exceptional marksmanship skills. He had recorded over 40 confirmed kills during his 3 deployments, and his presence often made the difference between success and failure in operations like this. Palmer's rifle cracked once, and Morrison saw one of the enemy muzzle flashes immediately cease. A second shot followed quickly, and another Taliban position went silent. Palmer's deadly accuracy was already having an impact on the enemy's ability to maintain their coordinated fire. Good shooting, Palmer, Morrison called out as he moved to a new position. Keep them honest. Rodriguez had managed to reach the rocky outcropping first, and was already setting up a defensive position when a rocket-propelled grenade exploded against the rocks just meters from his location. The blast showered him with stone fragments, but his body armor and helmet protected him from serious injury. The explosion did, however, destroy most of his communications equipment. "Rodriguez, you okay?" Morrison shouted. "I'm good, sir," Rodriguez replied, shaking his head to clear the ringing in his ears. "But the radio gear is toast." The loss of their communications equipment meant that the team was now completely isolated. No air support, no extraction, and no way to call for reinforcements. They were on their own in hostile territory, facing an enemy force that seemed to know exactly where they were and what they were doing. Thompson reached the rocks and immediately began organizing the defensive perimeter. His years of combat experience had taught him how to maximize the effectiveness of a small unit in a defensive position. He positioned each team member to cover a specific sector, ensuring that there were no blind spots that the enemy could exploit. "Chen, take that position on the left," Thompson directed. "Palmer, you've got the high ground on the right. Santos, you're with me in the center." Brooks, the intelligence specialist, was studying the enemy positions through his binoculars when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Among the Taliban fighters, he could see at least 3 individuals wearing different uniforms and carrying equipment that was definitely not standard insurgent gear. "Sir, we've got foreign fighters down there," Brooks reported to Morrison. "Russian uniforms, and they're carrying some serious hardware." Morrison felt his stomach drop. The presence of Russian military advisors with the Taliban fighters meant that this operation had international implications that went far beyond a simple intelligence-gathering mission. It also explained the sophisticated jamming equipment and the coordinated nature of the ambush. The enemy fire was intensifying, and Morrison could hear the distinctive sound of mortars being fired. Within seconds, the first mortar rounds began exploding around their position, sending deadly fragments of metal and stone flying through the air. The enemy was clearly trying to soften up their defensive position before launching a ground assault. Santos had found cover behind a large boulder when he heard a cry for help from Chen's position. Looking over, he saw that Chen had been hit by shrapnel from one of the mortar explosions. Blood was flowing from a wound in his left arm, and he was having difficulty operating his weapon. Without hesitation, Santos left his covered position and crawled across the rocky ground to reach Chen. Bullets snapped overhead as he worked to apply first aid to the wounded SEAL. The shrapnel had created a deep gash in Chen's arm, but it had missed the major blood vessels. "You're going to be fine," Santos told Chen as he applied a pressure bandage. "Just a flesh wound." "Just a flesh wound." Chen gritted his teeth against the pain. "I can still fight, Doc." Santos helped Chen move to a more protected position and made sure he had enough ammunition to continue engaging the enemy. The team medic's courage under fire was inspiring to the other team members, who could see that their wounded teammate was still in the fight. Palmer's sniper rifle continued to speak at regular intervals, and each shot seemed to reduce the volume of enemy fire directed at their position. However, Morrison could see that the Taliban fighters were beginning to maneuver for a final assault. Groups of armed men were moving through the rocky terrain on both flanks, trying to get close enough to overrun the SEAL position. "They're getting ready to rush us," Thompson observed. "We need to thin them out before they get too close." Morrison made a decision that would risk everything on one desperate gambit. Instead of waiting for the enemy assault, he would launch a preemptive counterattack designed to disrupt their preparations and buy his team more time. "Brooks, Palmer, you maintain overwatch," Morrison ordered. "Everyone else, we're going to hit their left flank before they're ready for us." The plan was audacious and dangerous, but Morrison knew that passive defense would ultimately lead to their destruction. By taking the initiative, they might be able to create enough confusion among the enemy ranks to break out of the encirclement. Thompson grinned fiercely as he checked his ammunition. "Now you're talking, Skipper. Let's show these guys what SEALs can do." Rodriguez, despite the loss of his communications equipment, had picked up Chen's demolitions gear and was preparing improvised explosive devices that could be used to support the counterattack. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency as he assembled the charges that would help clear enemy positions. The counterattack began with Palmer providing precise covering fire that forced the enemy fighters to keep their heads down. Morrison, Thompson, Santos, and Rodriguez moved out in pairs, using fire and movement tactics to advance on the enemy's left flank. The Taliban fighters were clearly surprised by the aggressive SEAL response. They had expected the Americans to remain in their defensive position, not launch an attack against superior numbers. This surprise gave Morrison's team a crucial advantage in the opening moments of their assault. Rodriguez threw his improvised explosive devices into suspected enemy positions, and the explosions created clouds of dust and debris that provided additional concealment for the advancing SEALs. Thompson's machine gun hammered enemy positions with devastating effect, while Santos moved with the fluid grace of a seasoned warrior. Morrison felt the familiar rush of combat as he engaged enemy fighters at close range. His training took over completely, and he moved through the rocky terrain with deadly efficiency. Each shot was aimed and deliberate, each movement calculated to maintain the momentum of the attack. The counterattack was succeeding beyond Morrison's expectations. The enemy's left flank was collapsing under the concentrated SEAL assault, and several Taliban fighters were retreating toward the valley below. However, Morrison knew that this success was temporary. The enemy still had overwhelming numbers and would soon reorganize for another attack. As the team regrouped after their successful assault, Brooks made a discovery that would change everything. While providing overwatch, he had been monitoring enemy radio frequencies with a small handheld scanner. What he heard made him call Morrison immediately. "Sir, you need to hear this," Brooks said urgently. "They're calling for reinforcements. At least 50 more fighters are heading this way, and they should arrive within the hour." Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him. His team had fought brilliantly, but they were running low on ammunition and had one wounded man. Against 50 fresh fighters, their chances of survival were minimal. They needed a miracle, and they needed it soon. As if in answer to his thoughts, Palmer suddenly called out from his sniper position, "Sir, I've got movement on the ridge above us. Someone's up there, but I can't tell if it's friendly or hostile." Morrison grabbed his binoculars and focused on the ridge Palmer had indicated. Through the magnified lenses, he could see a lone figure positioned among the rocks. The figure appeared to be observing their situation, but Morrison couldn't determine the person's intentions or allegiance. The mysterious observer would soon prove to be either their salvation or their final doom. But for now, the SEALs could only wait and wonder, while preparing for the next phase of their desperate battle for survival. The mysterious figure on the ridge remained motionless for several minutes while Morrison's team continued to engage the Taliban fighters below. Palmer kept his scope trained on the unknown observer, ready to engage if the person proved hostile. The tension was unbearable as 8 American warriors fought for their lives while being watched by someone whose intentions remained completely unknown. Morrison was coordinating the team's defensive fire when he heard a sound that made his heart skip a beat. The distinctive whine of incoming artillery rounds was unmistakable to anyone who had served in combat zones. The enemy reinforcements hadn't arrived yet, but they had apparently brought heavy weapons with them. "Incoming!" Thompson shouted as the first artillery rounds began impacting around their position. The explosions were devastating in their intensity. Each round created a crater several feet deep and sent deadly shrapnel flying in all directions. The rocky outcropping that had provided the SEALs with protection was being systematically destroyed by the artillery barrage. Morrison knew that his team couldn't survive much more of this punishment. Chen, despite his wounded arm, was still returning fire when a piece of shrapnel from an artillery explosion caught him in the leg. This second wound was more serious than the first, and Santos immediately crawled to his position under the continuing bombardment to provide medical assistance. "How bad is it?" Morrison called out to Santos, while continuing to fire at enemy positions. Santos examined Chen's leg wound and didn't like what he saw. The shrapnel had severed a major blood vessel, and Chen was losing blood rapidly. Without immediate medical attention at a proper facility, the young SEAL might not survive. "He needs a medevac, sir," Santos reported. "I can stabilize him temporarily, but he's lost a lot of blood." Morrison felt the crushing weight of command responsibility. Chen was depending on him for his life, but they were trapped in an impossible situation, with no way to call for medical evacuation. The artillery barrage was making it impossible to maintain their defensive position, and enemy reinforcements would arrive soon. It was at that moment when everything changed. Palmer, who had been maintaining his vigil on the mysterious figure on the ridge, suddenly saw the person stand up and signal in their direction. The figure was making deliberate hand gestures that Palmer recognized as standard military communication signals. "Sir, the guy on the ridge is using our hand signals," Palmer reported excitedly. "He's saying, 'friendly' and 'assistance available.'" Morrison grabbed his own binoculars and looked toward the ridge. The figure was definitely using proper military signals. But Morrison remained cautious. In hostile territory, enemy forces sometimes used captured personnel or sophisticated deception tactics to lure unsuspecting troops into traps. The artillery barrage suddenly stopped, creating an eerie silence that was almost more unsettling than the explosions had been. Morrison used this lull to signal back to the figure on the ridge, using standard SEAL team communication protocols that only friendly forces would know. The response was immediate and reassuring. The figure signaled back with the correct countersigns, identifying himself as American military personnel. More importantly, he indicated that he had communications capability and could coordinate support for the trapped SEAL team. Rodriguez, whose communications equipment had been destroyed earlier, looked up at Morrison with hope in his eyes. "Sir, if that guy can get through to command, we might actually have a chance." Morrison made the difficult decision to trust the mysterious figure. They had no other options, and Chen's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Using his binoculars, Morrison signaled their situation to the figure on the ridge, indicating that they had wounded personnel and were surrounded by superior enemy forces. The response was swift and professional. The figure began moving along the ridge, clearly heading toward a position where he could provide better assistance. Morrison could see that the person was carrying a large backpack and what appeared to be sophisticated communications equipment. Thompson had been monitoring the enemy positions through his rifle scope when he noticed something disturbing. The Taliban fighters were regrouping in the valley below, and their numbers had significantly increased. The reinforcements had apparently arrived while the SEALs were dealing with the artillery barrage. "Sir, we've got company," Thompson reported grimly. "I count at least 40 fighters down there, and they're getting ready for another assault." Morrison assessed their tactical situation quickly. Chen was seriously wounded and needed immediate medical attention. Their ammunition was running dangerously low after the extended firefight. The enemy had overwhelming numerical superiority and heavy weapons support. Without intervention from the mysterious figure on the ridge, the SEAL team's chances of survival were virtually zero. Palmer suddenly spoke up with excitement in his voice. "Sir, the guy on the ridge has a big rifle. Looks like a .50 caliber sniper system. If he's as good as his equipment suggests, he might be able to even the odds a little." As if to confirm Palmer's assessment, they heard the distinctive boom of a large caliber sniper rifle echoing from the ridge above. One of the Taliban fighters who had been directing the enemy assault suddenly dropped to the ground and didn't get back up. The shot had been incredibly precise, taken at a range of over 800 meters in difficult mountain conditions. The effect on enemy morale was immediate and dramatic. The Taliban fighters began seeking cover and looking nervously toward the ridge where the shot had originated. Their confidence in their overwhelming numerical advantage was clearly shaken by the presence of a skilled marksman in an elevated position. Rodriguez was working frantically to jury-rig a radio system from the damaged components of his communications gear when he managed to pick up a faint transmission. The signal was weak and distorted, but it was definitely coming from the figure on the ridge. "This is Angel 7 to SEAL team below," the voice crackled through the static. "I have eyes on your position and am coordinating air support. Hold your position and maintain defensive fire. Help is on the way." Morrison felt a surge of relief wash over him. Angel 7 was clearly a call sign used by American Special Operations Forces, and the mention of air support meant that their isolation might soon be broken. However, he also knew that air support would take time to arrive, and the enemy assault could begin at any moment. Santos was continuing to work on Chen's wounds when the young SEAL grabbed his arm weakly. Chen's face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were still alert and focused. "Doc, don't let me slow down the team," Chen whispered. "If you guys need to move, just leave me here with a rifle and some ammo." Santos looked at Chen with the fierce loyalty that defined the SEAL Brotherhood. "Nobody gets left behind, Tony. We're all going home together." The sniper rifle on the ridge boomed again, and another enemy fighter dropped. Angel 7 was clearly a marksman of exceptional skill, able to deliver precision fire at extreme range under combat conditions. His presence was forcing the enemy to reconsider their assault plans. Brooks, who had been monitoring enemy communications, suddenly looked up with alarm. "Sir, they're calling in their own air support. Sounds like they have access to attack helicopters." Morrison felt his heart sink. If the enemy had helicopter support, the SEAL team's position would become untenable very quickly. The rocky outcropping that had provided them with protection against ground assault would offer no defense against aerial attack. As if reading Morrison's thoughts, Angel 7's voice crackled over Rodriguez's improvised radio system again. "SEAL team, be advised that friendly fast movers are inbound. Mark your position with infrared strobes and take cover in 3 minutes." Palmer immediately began setting up the team's infrared identification strobes, while the other SEALs prepared for the arrival of American close air support. The timing was going to be critical. If the enemy assault began before the air support arrived, the team might not survive long enough to be rescued. Thompson was watching the enemy positions through his rifle scope when he saw the Taliban fighters beginning to move forward. The enemy commanders had apparently decided to launch their assault before American air power could arrive on scene. "Here they come," Thompson announced calmly as he prepared to engage the advancing enemy forces. Morrison looked up at the ridge where Angel 7 was positioned, then down at his wounded teammate, and finally at the advancing enemy forces. The next few minutes would determine whether 8 American warriors lived to fight another day or became casualties in a remote Afghan valley. Everything depended on the skills of a mysterious marksman and the timing of American air support. The battle for survival was about to reach its climax. The Taliban assault began with a coordinated attack from 3 directions simultaneously. Morrison could see at least 15 fighters moving up the rocky slope directly toward their position, while another group was attempting to flank them from the left. A third group was providing covering fire from concealed positions in the valley below. Angel 7's sniper rifle continued its deadly work from the ridge above. Each shot was precisely aimed and devastatingly effective. Morrison watched through his binoculars as the mysterious marksman eliminated key enemy personnel with surgical precision. The Taliban fighters were beginning to realize that their numerical advantage was being negated by superior firepower and positioning. Palmer had set up the infrared identification strobes exactly as instructed, and now the team was waiting anxiously for the arrival of American air support. The sound of approaching helicopters was still absent from the mountain air, and Morrison was beginning to worry that the timing wouldn't work in their favor. Santos had done everything possible for Chen's wounds under the circumstances, but the young SEAL was clearly weakening from blood loss. Chen remained conscious and alert, but his skin was becoming increasingly pale, and his responses were slower than normal. "How much longer can he hold on?" Morrison asked Santos quietly. Santos checked Chen's pulse and examined his pupils. "Maybe 30 minutes, sir. After that, we're going to lose him unless we get him to proper medical facilities." Thompson had positioned himself where he could observe all 3 enemy approach routes, and he was coordinating the team's defensive fire with military precision. Years of combat experience had taught him how to maximize the effectiveness of a small unit against superior numbers. "Rodriguez, take the left flank," Thompson directed. "Brooks, you've got the center with me. Palmer, keep picking off their leaders." The intensity of the firefight was unlike anything Morrison had experienced in his 15 years of military service. The enemy was pressing their attack with fanatical determination, apparently willing to accept heavy casualties in order to overwhelm the SEAL position. Bullets were striking the rocks around them constantly, creating clouds of stone dust and metal fragments. Rodriguez was engaging enemy fighters on the left flank when he noticed something that made him call out urgently to Morrison. "Sir, they've got RPGs moving into position." 2 teams with rocket launchers trying to get close enough for direct fire. Morrison realized that rocket-propelled grenades fired at close range would be devastating to their defensive position. The rocky outcropping that had protected them from small arms fire would provide no defense against direct hits from high-explosive warheads. Angel 7 apparently saw the same threat from his elevated position on the ridge. His sniper rifle boomed twice in quick succession, and both RPG teams were eliminated before they could fire their weapons. The precision and timing of these shots was absolutely incredible, considering the range and the fact that the targets were moving through rocky terrain. Palmer was providing his own contribution to the defensive fire when he noticed something that made him smile grimly. Through his rifle scope, he could see that Angel 7 was using a Barrett M82 50 caliber sniper rifle. The same weapon system that Palmer had trained on extensively. The mysterious marksman was clearly a professional who understood how to use the weapon to maximum effectiveness. Whoever that guy is, he knows what he's doing, Palmer commented to Morrison during a brief lull in the enemy fire. Morrison was beginning to hope that they might actually survive this encounter when Brooks called out with information that changed everything. The intelligence specialist had been monitoring enemy communications when he intercepted a transmission that made his blood run cold. "Sir, they're bringing up heavy mortars," Brooks reported urgently. "Sounds like they have at least 4 tubes, and they're setting up for a sustained bombardment of our position." Morrison felt his heart sink. Heavy mortars would be able to destroy their defensive position completely, and there would be nowhere to hide from the devastating explosive power of the large-caliber rounds. Even Angel 7's exceptional marksmanship wouldn't be able to eliminate mortar crews positioned several kilometers away. It was at that critical moment when the sound they had been desperately waiting for finally reached their ears. The distinctive whop 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 of approaching helicopters was echoing off the mountain peaks, growing steadily louder as the aircraft approached their position. Rodriguez's improvised radio suddenly crackled to life with a transmission from the incoming air support. "Angel 7, this is Hammer Flight. 2A-10 Thunderbolts inbound to your location. Request target information and friendly positions." Morrison had never been happier to hear the sound of A-10 Warthogs approaching a combat zone. The twin-engine attack aircraft were specifically designed for close air support missions, and their massive 30mm cannon was capable of destroying any target on the battlefield. Angel 7's voice came through clearly on the radio as he coordinated with the incoming aircraft. "Hammer Flight, this is Angel 7. Friendly forces marked with IR strobes in defensive position on rocky outcropping. Enemy forces advancing from valley floor in 3 separate groups. Request immediate close air support." The lead A-10 pilot responded professionally. "Angel 7. Hammer 1 has visual on friendly strobes. Beginning attack run on enemy positions in the valley. Danger close. Recommend friendly forces take cover." Morrison ordered his team to seek the best available cover as the 8 seconds began their attack runs. The sound of the aircraft engines was growing louder, and Morrison could see the distinctive silhouettes of the Warthogs as they maneuvered into attack position. The first attack run was devastating in its effectiveness. The lead A-10's 30mm cannon fired a sustained burst that lasted several seconds, and Morrison could see the tracer rounds impacting among the enemy positions in the valley below. The distinctive sound of the GAU-8 cannon was like a giant buzzsaw cutting through the mountain air. Taliban fighters who had been advancing confidently toward the SEAL position suddenly found themselves under attack by one of the most feared weapons systems in the American arsenal. The psychological effect was immediate and dramatic. Enemy fighters began retreating toward whatever cover they could find, abandoning their coordinated assault in favor of individual survival. The second A-10 followed up with an attack on the enemy positions that had been providing covering fire from the valley floor. High-explosive rockets impacted among the Taliban positions, creating massive explosions that sent shockwaves echoing off the mountain peaks. Santos was checking on Chen's condition when the wounded SEAL opened his eyes and managed a weak smile. "Doc? Are those 8 seconds?" "Yes, they are," Santos replied with relief evident in his voice. "The cavalry has arrived." Angel 7 coordinated several more attack runs by the 8 seconds, systematically destroying enemy positions throughout the valley. His elevated position and professional military training allowed him to direct the airstrikes with deadly precision, while ensuring that no friendly forces were endangered. Morrison watched through his binoculars as the remaining Taliban fighters began a hasty retreat toward the mountains. The combination of Angel 7's sniper fire and the devastating A-10 attacks had completely broken the enemy's will to continue the fight. Thompson was observing the enemy retreat when he noticed something that made him call out to Morrison. "Sir, there's a group of enemy fighters trying to set up those mortars about 2 kilometers to our north. They're still within range of our position." Angel 7 apparently saw the same threat. His voice came over the radio with tactical precision. "Hammer Flight? This is Angel 7. Enemy mortar team setting up grid reference 41S, MD 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Request immediate strike on that position." The lead A-10 pilot acknowledged the target information and began maneuvering for an attack run on the mortar position. Morrison knew that eliminating the enemy's heavy weapons capability would effectively end the threat to his team. The A-10's attack on the mortar position was spectacular. High explosive rockets impacted directly among the Taliban weapons crew, creating a massive fireball that was visible from the SEAL position several kilometers away. The secondary explosions from the mortar ammunition created additional blasts that continued for several minutes. Rodriguez managed to establish radio contact with their operations center using components salvaged from his damaged equipment. "Base, this is Neptune Team. We are in contact with friendly air support and have broken enemy contact. Request immediate medical evacuation for wounded team member." The response from their operations center was swift and reassuring. "Neptune Team. Medical evacuation helicopter is inbound to your position. Estimated arrival time, 15 minutes. Angel 7 will coordinate landing zone security." Morrison felt an enormous sense of relief wash over him as he realized that his team was going to survive this encounter. Chen would receive the medical attention he needed, and all 8 SEALs would be going home alive. However, he was also intensely curious about the identity of Angel 7, the mysterious marksman who had appeared at exactly the right moment to save their lives. As the sound of the medical evacuation helicopter grew louder, Morrison looked up toward the ridge where Angel 7 was positioned. The mysterious figure was still there, maintaining overwatch of the valley to ensure that no enemy forces could threaten the helicopter landing. The identity of their savior remained unknown, but Morrison knew that they owed their lives to the skilled marksman who had answered their desperate call for help in the mountains of Afghanistan. The medical evacuation helicopter appeared over the ridge like a mechanical angel, its rotor blades creating a thunderous noise that echoed off the mountain peaks. Morrison could see that it was a UH-60 Blackhawk configured specifically for medical evacuation, with red crosses clearly visible on its sides. Angel 7's voice crackled over the radio as he coordinated the helicopter's approach to the improvised landing zone. "Dustoff 7-2, this is Angel 7. Landing zone is clear of enemy forces. Wind is from the southwest at 15 knots. Be advised that friendly sniper is providing overwatch from ridge position." The Blackhawk pilot acknowledged the information and began his approach to the rocky area that Morrison's team had cleared for the landing. The helicopter's crew chief was already preparing the medical equipment that would be needed to stabilize Chen during the flight to the military hospital. Santos had continued to monitor Chen's condition throughout the firefight, and he was relieved to see that the young SEAL was still conscious and responsive. However, Chen had lost a significant amount of blood, and his vital signs were becoming increasingly unstable. "Hang in there, Tony," Santos told Chen as they prepared him for evacuation. "The flight medics will have you fixed up in no time." Chen managed a weak smile despite his condition. "Thanks, Doc. I owe you one." Thompson and Rodriguez were providing security for the landing zone when Thompson noticed movement on a distant ridge. Through his binoculars, he could see several Taliban fighters observing the medical evacuation from a safe distance. However, they were clearly reluctant to engage while Angel 7 was still providing overwatch. The Black Hawk touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, and the flight medics immediately rushed to Chen's position with a stretcher and medical equipment. Their professionalism and efficiency were impressive as they quickly assessed his condition and prepared him for transport. Palmer had been watching Angel 7's position through his rifle scope when he saw the mysterious marksman stand up and begin moving along the ridge toward their location. For the first time since the encounter began, Morrison would have the opportunity to meet the man who had saved their lives. "Sir, it looks like Angel 7 is coming down to our position," Palmer reported. Morrison felt a mixture of curiosity and gratitude as he prepared to meet their savior. The man's exceptional marksmanship and professional radio procedures had clearly identified him as an experienced military operator. But his identity remained a complete mystery. Rodriguez had managed to re-establish full communications with their operations center and was providing a detailed situation report when he received information that surprised him. "Sir, Base wants to know if we've made contact with Master Sergeant David McKenna. Apparently, he's been operating in this area for the past month on a classified mission." Morrison's eyes widened with recognition at the name. McKenna was a legend in the special operations community, a Marine Corps scout sniper with over 20 years of combat experience. His reputation for exceptional marksmanship and tactical expertise was known throughout all branches of the military. The flight medics had loaded Chen onto the helicopter and were preparing for immediate departure when a lone figure appeared at the edge of the landing zone. The man was tall and lean, with weathered features that spoke of years spent in harsh environments. He was carrying the Barrett M82 rifle that had proven so devastatingly effective during the firefight. Morrison approached the newcomer with his hand extended in greeting. "Master Sergeant McKenna? I presume?" The man smiled and accepted Morrison's handshake with a grip that was firm and calloused from years of handling weapons. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, I heard your team was having a rough morning." McKenna's understated description of their desperate firefight brought smiles to the faces of all the SEALs. His calm professionalism and dry sense of humor were exactly what Morrison would have expected from a Marine with his reputation. "We owe you our lives," Morrison said sincerely. "If you hadn't been in the right place at the right time, we wouldn't be having this conversation." McKenna looked at the departing medical helicopter and then back at Morrison's team. "Actually, I've been tracking that Taliban cell for 3 weeks. They've been using Russian advisors to coordinate attacks against coalition forces. When I saw them setting up their ambush, I knew someone was walking into trouble." Thompson approached McKenna with obvious respect. "Master Sergeant, that was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen. 800 meters in mountain conditions with moving targets? Outstanding work." McKenna shrugged modestly. "The Barrett makes it easier. Besides, I had plenty of motivation. Couldn't let the Navy get shown up by a bunch of goat herders." The good-natured rivalry between Marines and Navy SEALs brought laughter from both groups, helping to release some of the tension from their harrowing experience. However, Morrison was also curious about McKenna's classified mission in the area. Brooks, who had been monitoring enemy communications throughout the encounter, approached McKenna with intelligence information. "Master Sergeant, those Russian advisors were coordinating with several other Taliban cells in the region. This ambush was apparently part of a larger operation." McKenna nodded grimly. "That's what I've been trying to determine. The Russians have been providing training and equipment to selected Taliban groups. Their goal is to increase the effectiveness of attacks against American forces. Rodriguez had been coordinating with their operations center when he received orders that would affect both teams." "Sir, we're ordered to extract to FOB Shank immediately. There's a helicopter inbound to pick us up in 20 minutes. Morrison looked at McKenna questioningly. "Are you coming with us, Master Sergeant?" McKenna considered the question carefully. "My mission here isn't finished yet, but I could use some updated intelligence on Russian activities in the region. Maybe we can help each other." Santos had remained behind to ensure that Chen was properly evacuated when he noticed that McKenna was carrying medical supplies in addition to his sniper equipment. The Marine had clearly been operating independently for an extended period and was prepared for any contingency. "Master Sergeant, you've been out here for a month by yourself?" Santos asked, with professional curiosity. McKenna smiled grimly. "Long-range reconnaissance is what Marines do best, Doc. Besides, someone has to keep an eye on what the bad guys are up to in these mountains." Palmer was examining McKenna's Barrett rifle with obvious appreciation when he noticed modifications that he had never seen before. The weapon had been customized with specialized optics and other equipment that suggested it was used for more than conventional sniping. "Master Sergeant, this is some serious hardware," Palmer observed. "Custom optics, suppressor, extended barrel. This is a professional setup." McKenna allowed Palmer to examine the rifle more closely. "When you're operating alone in hostile territory, You need every advantage you can get. This weapon system has kept me alive for the past month. Thompson was conducting a security sweep of the area when he noticed that all signs of the enemy forces had disappeared. The combination of Angel 7's sniper fire and the A-10 attacks had completely scattered the Taliban fighters, who had seemed so confident just hours earlier. The sound of approaching helicopters indicated that their extraction aircraft was arriving on schedule. Morrison gathered his team and prepared for departure, but he was reluctant to leave McKenna alone in the mountains. "Master Sergeant, are you sure you don't want to extract with us?" Morrison asked. "These mountains are going to be crawling with angry Taliban fighters looking for revenge." McKenna checked his equipment and adjusted his pack for continued operations. "Lieutenant Commander, my mission requires me to stay in the field. But I appreciate the offer, and I won't forget what your team did today." Rodriguez had established communications with the incoming extraction helicopter when the pilot provided information that would affect their departure. "Neptune team, be advised that enemy forces are regrouping in the valley to your south. Recommend immediate extraction to avoid further contact." Morrison realized that their time was running out. The Taliban fighters who had retreated during the airstrikes were apparently preparing for another attempt to engage American forces. However, they would be even more dangerous now, because they would be motivated by a desire for revenge. McKenna seemed to read Morrison's thoughts. "Don't worry about me, Commander. I know these mountains like the back of my hand, and I have friends in the area who can provide support if needed." The extraction helicopter touched down in the same landing zone that had been used for the medical evacuation. Morrison's team quickly boarded the aircraft, while McKenna provided security from a concealed position nearby. As the helicopter lifted off, Morrison looked down at the lone figure of Master Sergeant McKenna standing on the rocky ridge. The Marine was already fading back into the mountain terrain, resuming his solitary mission against overwhelming odds. Thompson spoke what all the SEALs were thinking. "That's one hell of a Marine down there." Morrison nodded in agreement as he watched McKenna disappear into the rocky landscape. "He saved our lives today. I just hope someone's watching his back out there." Rodriguez was monitoring radio frequencies when he picked up a transmission that made him smile. McKenna's voice was barely audible through the static, but his message was clear. "Angel 7 is back on station, continuing mission." As their helicopter flew toward safety, Morrison reflected on the day's events. They had walked into a carefully planned ambush, fought against overwhelming odds, and survived because of the intervention of a single Marine sniper. Chen would recover from his wounds, and all 8 SEALs would return home to fight another day. However, Morrison also knew that somewhere in the mountains below, Master Sergeant David McKenna was continuing his lonely mission against enemy forces who now had even more reason to want him dead. The Marines' courage and skill had saved their lives, but Morrison wondered who would save McKenna when he needed help. The helicopter disappeared over the mountain peaks, leaving behind a battlefield where 8 American warriors had proven that superior training and courage could overcome seemingly impossible odds. In the rocky terrain below, a single Marine continued his solitary watch, ready to answer the next call for help that might echo across the Afghan mountains.